It was a cold autumn night when three friends Alex, Mia, and Jake decided to take a late stroll through the quiet streets of their neighborhood. They'd lived there all their lives and knew every corner, but tonight, something felt off. "Look at this fog," Mia said, wrapping her jacket tighter around herself. "It's like something out of a horror movie." "Don't be dramatic," Alex chuckled. "Nothing ever happens around here." They turned onto a narrow pathway between two rows of houses, the kind of shortcut they'd used 100 times before. The faint sound of their footsteps echoed on the damp concrete, blending with the distant hum of the city. Jake slowed his pace, glancing over his shoulder. "Did you hear that?" he whispered. "Hear what?" Alex asked, stopping to listen. For a moment, there was nothing but the rustling of leaves in the wind. Then, faint but distinct, came the sound of another set of footsteps. They stopped the moment the friends stopped. Mia's eyes widened. "It's probably just someone else walking home," she said, though her voice trembled. "Let's keep moving," Jake suggested, trying to sound calm. The three quickened their pace, the shortcut suddenly feeling much longer than usual. The footsteps behind them resumed, staying just far enough to remain unseen but close enough to make their presence known. "Okay, this isn't funny anymore," Mia hissed. "Whoever it is, they're messing with us." Alex glanced around, searching for any sign of movement in the dense fog. "Let's turn here," he said, leading them onto a side street. But as they rounded the corner, a shadow flickered in the fog ahead. "Did you see that?" Jake whispered. "Let's just go back," Mia urged, her voice barely above a whisper. "No," Alex said, his voice firm though his hands were shaking. "If someone's following us, we can't let them corner us. Let's head for the pockets more open there." They moved quickly now, their breaths visible in the cold air. The footsteps behind them grew louder, quicker. The friends broke into a run, the narrow street opening up into the dark, empty park. As they reached the middle of the park, they stopped, gasping for air. Silence enveloped them. For a brief moment, they thought they'd lost their pursuer. And then, from the shadows of the trees, a low, guttural voice whispered, "Why are you running?" Their hearts froze. The night had only just begun. The friends froze, their wide eyes darting around the dark park. The fog swirled between the trees, obscuring anything beyond a few feet. "Who's there?" Alex shouted, trying to sound braver than he felt. His voice echoed into the emptiness, met only with silence. Jake tugged at his sleeve. "Alex, don't. Let's just go." "Go where?" Mia said. "They're everywhere." "You heard that voice, it came from the trees." The voice came again, low and taunting, but now it seemed closer. "You can't leave. You're already mine." Panic surged through them like electricity. They bolted, sticking together as they sprinted deeper into the park. Gravel crunched beneath their feet, and the cool air burned in their lungs. Mia stumbled, and Jake grabbed her arm to keep her moving. "There's a light up ahead," Alex shouted, pointing to a faint glow in the distance. The glow turned out to be a flickering street lamp, casting an eerie yellow circle onto an old, graffiti-covered playground. They huddled under the light, their backs to each other, scanning the shadows for movement. "Did we lose them?" Jake panted, his voice shaking. "Sure," Mia whispered, her head whipping around. Listen. The fog seemed to thicken, swallowing the world outside the faint glow of the street lamp. The footsteps were gone, replaced by an oppressive, suffocating silence. And then... crunch. The sound came from just beyond the playground, where the light faded into darkness. Who's there? Alex yelled again, gripping a broken branch he'd picked up from the ground. A figure emerged from the shadows, just enough for them to make out its silhouette, a tall, lanky shape with unnatural movements, as if it didn't quite understand how to walk. Its head tilted, almost curiously, before it took a slow, deliberate step forward. "Stay back!" Jake shouted, his voice cracking. The figure stopped, cocking its head to the other side. Then it whispered, "Run." Without hesitation, the three turned and sprinted in the direction they'd come from. The fog seemed to pull at their limbs, making every step feel heavier. Behind them, the sound of footsteps returned, this time faster, heavier, and relentless. "Over here!" Mia screamed, spotting an opening in the fence that led to a narrow alley. They squeezed through, scraping their arms on the rusty metal, and kept running. The alley was tight and twisted, but eventually, it spat them out onto a familiar street. Jake bent over, gasping for air. "Did we lose it?" But before anyone could answer, Alex noticed something chilling. The street was completely empty. No cars, no people, not even the faint hum of streetlights. This isn't right," he stammered. "Where are we?" Mia turned slowly, her face pale. "We didn't come out where we were supposed to." The fog shifted around them, and the low voice whispered again, echoing from every direction. "You'll never leave." The three friends stood frozen in the middle of the silent street, their breaths visible in the icy air. The familiar neighborhood they thought they'd escaped into was eerily different. The houses were dark, windows blacked out as if abandoned. No streetlights illuminated their path, just the faint glow of the moon breaking through the fog. "This isn't possible," Mia whispered, her voice trembling. "We came out onto Maple Street." "I'm sure of it." Alex turned in a slow circle, scanning their surroundings. "It's not Maple Street. It's something else." His grip tightened around the branch he was still clutching. "Stop," Jake said sharply. "We're just panicking. We need to keep moving. Maybe someone's inside one of these houses." "You think they're just sitting in there, waiting to help us?" Alex shot back, his nerves fraying. "Shut up, both of you," Mia hissed. "We can't stay out here." They hesitated for a moment, then moved toward the nearest house. Its front yard was overgrown, weeds spilling onto the cracked sidewalk. The porch light was off, but a faint glow seeped from behind the curtains in the upstairs window. Mia knocked on the door, the sound echoing too loudly in the still night. "Hello? Is anyone home?" No response. She knocked again, harder this time. "Maybe they're asleep," Jake said, though his voice lacked conviction. "I'm not just standing here," Alex muttered. He reached for the doorknob, expecting it to be locked. But to their surprise, it turned easily. The door creaked open, revealing a dimly lit hallway. The smell of damp wood and mildew hit them immediately. "This feels wrong," Mia whispered, backing away. "We don't have a choice," Alex said. We can't just stay out there. Come on. Reluctantly, they stepped inside. The door closed behind them with a quiet thud, though none of them had touched it. The house was eerily silent, except for the faint creaking of the floorboards under their feet. The glow they'd seen from outside came from an old TV in the living room, playing static. A worn couch and a coffee table littered with empty mugs gave the impression that someone lived here or had, not long ago. Hello, Jake called out, his voice shaky. We're lost. Is anyone here? A faint sound came from upstairs, a soft shuffle, like someone moving. The three exchanged nervous glances. Let's just leave, Mia urged, her voice barely above a whisper. Wait, Alex said. What if it's someone who can help us? Jake shook his head. Or it's whoever was following us. The sound came again, this time louder. It wasn't just footsteps, it sounded like something being dragged across the floor. We're leaving, Mia said firmly, grabbing Jake's arm. But as they turned to the door, they heard it. The faint click of a lock. Alex grabbed the doorknob and twisted it frantically, but it wouldn't budge. It's locked, he shouted, pulling harder. From the inside? Jake said, his voice rising in panic. Behind them, the dragging sound grew louder, now accompanied by a low, rhythmic thudding. It was coming closer. Mia clutched Alex's sleeve. We need to hide. Now. They bolted into the nearest room, a small kitchen with peeling wallpaper and an open pantry. Jake shut the door quietly behind them, pressing his ear against it. The sound stopped. For a moment, the only noise was their ragged breathing. Then, from somewhere in the house, a quiet voice broke the silence. You shouldn't have come inside. Mia's hands flew to her mouth to stifle a scream. The kitchen fell into an oppressive silence, each friend straining to hear the faintest sound. The voice that had spoken seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. We need to get out of here, Alex whispered, his voice barely audible. How? Jake snapped, his panic barely controlled. The door's locked, and whatever's out there is between us and the exit. Mia's eyes darted around the room, landing on a small window above the sink. There. The window. We can climb out. Alex moved quickly, testing the latch. It groaned but gave way. He shoved the window open, the cool night air flooding the room. Okay, he said, I'll go first and help you through. He climbed onto the counter and hoisted himself out, landing awkwardly on the wet grass outside. He turned back and reached through the window. Come on, Mia. Hurry. Mia scrambled up, her hands shaking as she gripped Alex's. He pulled her through, and she landed beside him. Jake, come on. Mia urged. Jake hesitated, glancing back at the door. The dragging sound had started again, slow and deliberate, heading toward the kitchen. Without another thought, he climbed onto the counter, squeezing through the window just as the kitchen door creaked open behind him. Go! Alex whispered sharply, pulling Jake to his feet. The three of them sprinted across the backyard, ducking under low-hanging branches and dodging debris. The air felt heavier, the fog clinging to their skin. They reached the fence at the edge of the yard, a tall, wooden barrier with splintering planks. "We'll have to climb," Alex said, already boosting Mia up. One by one, they scaled the fence, landing in the overgrown alley on the other side. The moment Jake's feet hit the ground, they ran, not daring to look back. The alley led them out to a street, a real, familiar street this time. Streetlights flickered overhead, and in the distance, they could see the glowing windows of a late-night convenience store. Mia slowed, clutching her side, tears streaming down her face. "We're out," she gasped. "We made it." Alex and Jake stopped, their breaths ragged. The three of them stood under the streetlight, their faces pale and damp with sweat. What was that?" Jake finally managed, his voice hoarse. "I don't know," Alex said, shaking his head. "I don't want to know." They turned toward the convenience store, their steps unsteady but determined. As they reached the door, Alex glanced back one last time. The fog seemed to linger at the edge of the street, thick and unnatural. For a moment, he thought he saw a shadow in the mist, a tall, lanky figure standing still, watching them. But when he blinked, it was gone. The three of them entered the store, the bright fluorescent lights a welcome reprieve from the darkness outside. They didn't speak of what had happened, not to each other and not to anyone else. But none of them ever walked through that neighborhood at night again. It was supposed to be a quick adventure, a little thrill to break up the monotony of their quiet town. Emma, Ryan, and Tyler had heard the rumors about the old warehouse on the edge of town. People said it was cursed, that anyone who went inside came out different. Most dismissed the stories as urban legends, but for the three friends, it was the perfect challenge. "Are we really doing this?" Emma asked, her voice wavering as they stood outside the towering building. Its windows were shattered, and rust streaked the metal walls like dried blood. "Come on," Ryan grinned, pulling a flashlight from his backpack. "It's just an empty warehouse. What's the worst that could happen?" Tyler adjusted his hoodie, glancing around nervously. "I don't know, man. It feels off." Ryan rolled his eyes. "You're not chickening out, are you?" Emma sighed. "Let's just go in and get it over with." The trio pushed open the heavy, rusted door, the metal groaning loudly in protest. Inside, the air was damp and cold, filled with the scent of mildew and rust. Their footsteps echoed against the concrete floor as they ventured deeper, the beam of Ryan's flashlight cutting through the darkness. Rows of old machinery loomed like forgotten skeletons, their gears frozen in time. Dust floated in the air, disturbed by their movement. "This place is massive," Tyler muttered, his voice bouncing off the walls. "Creepy," Emma added, shivering. They wandered through the labyrinth of rusting equipment, their unease growing with each step. Suddenly, Ryan's flashlight flickered, then went out. "Really?" he groaned, smacking it against his palm. The beam returned, but only for a second before dying completely. Use your phone, Emma suggested, pulling hers out. The glow from her screen barely illuminated their surroundings, but it was better than nothing. As they continued, a faint sound reached their ears, a distant thud, followed by the faint scrape of something being dragged. "Did you hear that?" Tyler whispered, his eyes darting around. "Probably just an animal," Ryan said, though his voice lacked its usual confidence. Emma stopped, her flashlight aimed at a door slightly ajar. "What's in there?" she asked. Ryan shrugged. "Only one way to find out." He pushed the door open, revealing a small office. The walls were covered in peeling paint, and a desk sat in the corner, its surface cluttered with old papers and a broken lamp. "See? Nothing scary," Ryan said, rifling through the papers. Emma and Tyler stayed by the doorway, their nerves on edge. That's when Tyler noticed something, a faint set of footprints in the dust leading out of the room. "Guys," he said, his voice low. "Look at this." Ryan followed his gaze, his smirk fading. "Those aren't ours." Before they could process what that meant, a loud crash echoed through the warehouse, followed by the unmistakable sound of heavy footsteps. "Run!" Emma shouted, grabbing Tyler's arm. They bolted out of the office and back into the open space, their footsteps pounding against the concrete. The sound of pursuit was close behind, heavy and deliberate. Ryan pointed toward a staircase leading to the second floor. "Up there." They scrambled up the metal stairs, the old structure creaking under their weight. At the top, they found themselves on a narrow catwalk overlooking the warehouse floor. "What now?" Tyler gasped, clutching the railing. Ryan scanned the area, his face pale. "There another staircase. It might lead to the roof." They ran toward it, the catwalk swaying under their weight. Below them, the footsteps stopped. Emma glanced down and froze. A figure stood motionless in the shadows, its face obscured but its gaze unmistakably fixed on them. "It's watching us," she whispered, her voice shaking. "Don't stop," Ryan urged, pulling her along. They reached the staircase and climbed to the roof, the cold night air hitting them like a wall. The town's lights twinkled in the distance, a cruel reminder of how far they were from safety. "What do we do now?" Emma asked, her voice breaking. Before anyone could answer, the metal door to the roof creaked open. The figure emerged, stepping into the moonlight. It was a man, or what used to be one. His face was gaunt, his eyes hollow, and his movements unnaturally jerky. Ryan grabbed a loose piece of pipe from the roof. "Stay back," he yelled, brandishing it like a weapon. The figure didn't respond. It took a step forward, then another, its head tilting as if studying them. "Jump," Tyler said suddenly. "What? Are you insane?" Emma hissed. "We don't have a choice," he said, pointing to a pile of old mattresses and debris below. "It's the only way." Ryan hesitated, then nodded. "Fine. On 3. The three of them ran to the edge, their hearts pounding. 1, 2, 3. They jumped, the wind rushing past them as they hit the pile below. Pain shot through their limbs, but they were alive. "Get up," Emma urged, helping Tyler to his feet. They ran toward the street, not daring to look back. When they finally reached the road, they collapsed onto the pavement, gasping for air. The warehouse loomed in the distance, silent and still. "Did we lose it?" Emma asked, her voice barely a whisper. Ryan nodded, though his eyes remained fixed on the building. "I think so." But as they turned to leave, a faint sound reached their ears, the creak of a rusted door opening. They didn't wait to see what came next. The faint creak of the rusted door sent a chill down their spines. Emma froze mid-step, her heart hammering in her chest. Ryan grabbed her arm, pulling her forward. "Don't stop. Just go," he hissed. They stumbled down the road, their adrenaline fading into exhaustion. Tyler kept glancing over his shoulder, but the warehouse remained still in the distance. "We need to call someone," Emma said, fumbling for her phone with trembling hands. "No signal," she muttered, holding the screen up to the sky in frustration. "Keep moving," Ryan insisted. "The town isn't far. Once we're there, we can call the cops." The group continued, their steps hurried and uneven. The road stretched endlessly ahead, lined with skeletal trees that swayed gently in the night breeze. The silence was oppressive, broken only by their labored breathing. After what felt like an eternity, they saw lights in the distant streetlights and the faint hum of a passing car. Relief flooded over them. "There. We're almost there," Tyler exclaimed, breaking into a jog. As they approached the edge of town, they stopped to catch their breath under a flickering streetlight. Emma bent over, her hands on her knees. "Okay," she panted. "We made it. Now we call for help." Ryan pulled out his phone, glancing at the signal bars. Finally, there were enough to make a call. He dialed 911, his fingers shaking. "911, what's your emergency?" a calm voice answered. "We were at the old warehouse outside town," Ryan said quickly. "Someone or something was following us. We barely got out." There was a pause. "The old warehouse?" the operator asked slowly. "Yes," Emma interjected, her voice urgent. "We need someone to check it out." "Ma'am," the operator said cautiously, "that warehouse has been abandoned for decades. There haven't been any reports of activity there." "There's something there," Tyler shouted into the phone. "We saw it." "We'll send a patrol to investigate," the operator said, though her tone carried a note of doubt. "Stay where you are. Officers will meet you shortly." They sat down on the curb, their bodies still tense despite the safety of the town around them. Minutes passed, then headlights appeared down the street. A patrol car pulled up, and two officers stepped out. "You the ones who called?" one of them asked. "Yes," Ryan said, standing up. "We were in the warehouse, and there was someone inside." The officers exchanged glances. "We'll check it out," the older one said. "But you kids shouldn't have been out there in the first place. It's dangerous, even if no one's around." Emma nodded quickly. "We know. We just..." Before she could finish, the radio on the officer's belt crackled to life. "Unit 5, we've got something on the surveillance feed near the old warehouse," a voice said. "Looks like movement inside." The officers stiffened. The younger one grabbed his flashlight. "Stay here," he ordered firmly, getting back into the car. They drove off, leaving the friends alone under the streetlight. "What if they don't come back?" Tyler asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "They will," Ryan said, though he sounded unsure. Minutes dragged into what felt like hours. The faint sound of a siren in the distance came and went, but the patrol car didn't return. Then, from the direction of the warehouse, a low, rumbling sound echoed through the night. It was followed by a flash of light, a burst of brilliance that illuminated the horizon for just a moment. The three friends stared at each other, fear returning in full force. "What was that?" Emma whispered. Ryan shook his head. "I don't know. But I don't think we're supposed to." They stood there, silent and unsure, as the night swallowed the warehouse once again. The eerie flash of light faded, leaving an oppressive silence in its wake. The three friends stood frozen under the streetlight, their breaths shallow. "What do we do?" Emma asked, her voice trembling. "We wait," Ryan said, though his tone lacked conviction. He glanced down the road, hoping to see the patrol car return, but there was nothing, just an empty stretch of road leading back into the dark. Tyler shifted uneasily. "Maybe we should just go home. The cops will handle it." Emma hesitated. "But what if they need help? What if?" She trailed off, unable to finish the thought. "They're trained for this kind of thing," Ryan said, though he sounded like he was trying to convince himself. "We'd only get in the way." Another minute passed, then the distant sound of an engine broke the silence. A pair of headlights appeared, growing brighter as the vehicle approached. Relief washed over them as the familiar shape of the patrol car came into view. The car slowed to a stop, and the older officer stepped out, his face pale and drawn. "You kids are lucky you got out of there," he said, his voice low. "What happened?" Ryan asked. The officer shook his head. "Nothing we can explain right now. We've called for backup to secure the area. You need to go home and stay out of this." Emma frowned. "But..." "No buts," the officer interrupted firmly. "Whatever's in that warehouse isn't your problem anymore." The tone of finality in his voice silenced any protests. The three friends exchanged uneasy glances but nodded. The officer escorted them back into town, dropping them off near a familiar diner. "Stay inside," he warned before driving off. Inside the diner, the warm lights and low hum of conversation felt surreal after the events of the night. They sat in a corner booth, silent, until Tyler finally spoke. "What do you think they saw?" Ryan shook his head. "I don't know, but we're not going back to find out." Emma stared at her untouched cup of coffee, her hands wrapped tightly around it. "Do you think it'll stop there?" "Whatever it is." No one answered. The rest of the night passed in uneasy quiet. Eventually, they parted ways, each retreating to the safety of their homes. Over the following days, news of the warehouse spread. People reported seeing strange lights in the area, and rumors swirled about what the police had found or hadn't found. The friends avoided discussing it, but the memory lingered like a shadow, a constant reminder of how close they had come to something they didn't understand. Months later, The warehouse was officially condemned and sealed off, the area around it fenced in with warnings of danger. But Emma, Ryan, and Tyler knew the truth. Some things are better left alone, and not all mysteries are meant to be solved. The months that followed were quiet, but the memory of that night at the warehouse lingered with Emma, Ryan, and Tyler. They avoided talking about it, but it was clear in the way they acted, glancing over their shoulders more often, sticking to familiar places, and avoiding anything that resembled adventure. The warehouse became a source of local gossip. Some claimed it was haunted, others said it was used for illegal activities, but the police refused to comment on their investigation. No official explanation ever came, and the rumors only grew. For Emma, life slowly returned to normal. She focused on school, work, and her family. Yet, late at night, when the house was quiet, she often found herself replaying the events in her mind. She would look out her window at the distant outline of the town and wonder if the warehouse still stood in eerie silence, or if something inside had finally stirred again. Ryan buried himself in distractions, pouring his energy into sports and his part-time job. But even his usual confidence was shaken. Whenever he passed the edge of town, where the road led to the warehouse, he felt a chill and sped up, as if afraid that something unseen might notice him. Tyler, the most affected of the three, struggled the most. He became jumpy, avoiding late nights and refusing to go anywhere near the warehouse. He even stopped answering their group chats for a while, needing space to process what had happened. Then, one day, months later, news broke that the warehouse was being demolished. Emma, Ryan, and Tyler met at the diner, their old haunt, to talk about it. "Do you think that'll fix it?" Tyler asked, stirring his coffee absent-mindedly. Emma shrugged. "Maybe. If there's nothing left of it, there's nothing left to haunt, right?" Ryan frowned, his gaze distant. "Or maybe whatever was there just moves on to somewhere else." The conversation ended there. None of them wanted to dwell on what that could mean. A week later, the demolition began. Emma watched the news coverage on TV, showing bulldozers tearing through the rusted walls and machinery being hauled away. There was no mention of anything unusual found inside, no reports of strange sightings or disturbances. It was over. Or at least, that's what they told themselves. Life went on, and the warehouse became just another piece of local history, an odd story that faded with time. But for Emma, Ryan, and Tyler, the memory of that night stayed with them. It was a quiet reminder that some places and some experiences are best left in the past. Realistically, they moved forward, but they never forgot. It was supposed to be a fun weekend getaway. Kate, Liam, and Josh had rented a small cabin deep in the woods, far from the distractions of the city. Kate had found the place online, rustic and cozy, the description read. The pictures showed a charming little house surrounded by towering trees, perfect for hiking and campfires. By the time they arrived late Friday evening, the sun had already dipped below the horizon. The dirt road leading to the cabin was narrow and overgrown, their car's headlights barely illuminating the path ahead. "This is secluded," Liam remarked, peering out the window. "That's the point," Kate replied, though her voice wavered slightly. The cabin was smaller than they'd expected. The wood paneling was weathered, the porch sagged a little, and the single light above the door flickered faintly. But inside, it was clean and cozy, with a small fireplace, a few worn-out armchairs, and a kitchen stocked with basics. They unpacked quickly, lighting a fire and settling in for the night. As the hours passed, they played card games and laughed over old memories, the unease of the drive fading away. It wasn't until nearly midnight, when Josh went outside to grab more firewood, that the mood shifted. "Hey, do you hear that?" he called back, standing on the porch. Kate and Liam exchanged glances before joining him. The forest was silent, but not the comforting silence of nature. This was heavy, oppressive, like the woods were holding their breath. Then came the sound, faint, rhythmic, and distant. It was a steady tapping, like wood striking wood, echoing through the trees. "What is that?" Kate whispered. Liam shrugged. "Probably just a branch in the wind or something." Josh frowned. "There's no wind." They stood there for a moment longer, tapping continuing, before deciding it was nothing to worry about. Back inside, they locked the door and tried to shake off the feeling. But the sound didn't stop. An hour later, the tapping grew louder, closer. It wasn't random anymore, it followed a deliberate, almost hypnotic rhythm. Kate's nerves frayed. "Maybe it's an animal," she suggested, though she didn't believe it herself. "Or someone messing with us," Josh muttered, peering through the curtains. Liam grabbed a flashlight and opened the door, stepping onto the porch. The beam of light cut through the darkness, revealing only trees and shadows. "See?" "Nothing," he said, turning back. But as he closed the door, they all heard it, a sharp knock, directly on the side of the cabin. They froze. "Okay, this isn't funny anymore," Kate said, her voice trembling. Josh grabbed the fire poker from the hearth. "Whoever's out there, get lost," he shouted, but there was no response. The knocking continued, moving around the cabin, first on the walls, then on the windows. It was deliberate, measured, as if whoever was out there wanted to toy with them. They barricaded the door with a chair and huddled in the living room, trying to come up with a plan. "We should leave," Kate said. "And drive where?" Liam countered. "It's pitch dark, and we're in the middle of nowhere." Josh nodded. "We wait until morning. Whatever's out there won't stick around in daylight." The night dragged on. The knocking stopped, only to start again minutes later, always just loud enough to keep them on edge. Around 3 a.m., the sounds ceased entirely. "I think it's gone," Liam whispered, though none of them dared to check. As the first light of dawn filtered through the trees, they cautiously stepped outside. The forest was quiet again, peaceful even, as if nothing had happened. But then Kate noticed something carved into the side of the cabin, strange symbols etched deeply into the wood, ones they didn't recognize. What the hell is this? Josh asked, running his fingers over the markings. Liam's face paled. I don't think we should stay to find out. They packed up in record time, leaving the cabin and its mysteries behind. When they returned the keys to the rental office later that day, Kate hesitated before asking the clerk, "Has anyone reported strange things at the cabin we stayed in?" The clerk raised an eyebrow. Which one? She gave the address. The clerk frowned. That one hasn't been rented out in years. Are you sure you stayed there? Kate felt a chill run down her spine. She opened her phone to show the rental confirmation email, but when she scrolled through her inbox, it was gone. The three friends exchanged uneasy glances, knowing they'd never get an explanation for what happened that night. Some things, they realized, are better left unanswered. Kate's heart raced as she stood frozen in front of the clerk. Her phone had glitched. No email confirmation, no record of the cabin booking. It was as though it had never existed. She turned to Liam and Josh, their faces mirroring her confusion. Did we really stay there? Liam asked quietly, his voice shaky. I don't know. I'm sure we did, Kate stammered, pulling her phone out again and checking her calendar. The reservation had been marked on the date, but there was nothing on the screen now. Josh shook his head. This is messed up. Let's just go. We're wasting time here. The clerk, seeing the confusion on their faces, spoke up. Listen, the cabin you're talking about. It's part of an old estate. It's been abandoned for a long time. People used to say strange things happened there, but we've stopped renting it out for a reason. Kate, Liam, and Josh exchanged glances. The unease that had settled over them the night before intensified. Had they really just imagined everything? But the strange symbols on the cabin's wall, the knocking, they couldn't have imagined that. No one's rented that cabin in months, the clerk added. It's been off limits due to safety issues. But if you really stayed there, you should be careful. Sometimes things don't leave. The words hit them like a cold wind. What do you mean, things don't leave? Kate asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The clerk hesitated, glancing nervously toward the back of the office. There were rumors about the original owners. Some kind of ritual. People said the land wasn't right. I'm not saying it's true, but there have been reports of people who got too curious. People who never quite felt right afterward. That was enough for them to know. They had to leave. They walked back to the car in silence, the weight of the conversation sinking in. The air felt thick, almost suffocating, as if something was pressing down on them, urging them to turn around. But they didn't. As they drove away, none of them spoke much. The landscape was serene, a stark contrast to the lingering dread that weighed on them. The further they drove from the cabin, the less they felt like themselves. They couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, of something trailing them just out of sight. Back home, days passed. They returned to their usual routines, but the unease didn't go away. Kate couldn't sleep without waking up in the middle of the night, her mind racing, trying to make sense of everything. Liam started avoiding the woods when he went on his runs. Josh, who had always been the skeptic, began having strange dreams about the cabin, dreams where he was back there, hearing the knocking, feeling the presence of something just beyond the door. One evening, Kate sat in her living room, scrolling through old pictures on her phone. She scrolled past a photo they had taken in front of the cabin, a shot of them standing together, smiles on their faces, the cabin in the background. Then she froze. At the edge of the photo, just beyond the trees, was a shadow. It wasn't quite human, but it was tall, moving, as if it had been caught in the frame. She zoomed in, her breath caught in her throat. The figure was blurred, but unmistakable. A chill spread through her body. She sent the photo to Liam and Josh, her fingers trembling as she typed, "Look at this." Liam replied first, "What is that?" Josh, a few minutes later, "It's nothing. Probably just the angle or a trick of the light." But Kate wasn't convinced. She couldn't explain the unease she felt whenever she looked at that photo. It was as if something had followed them back, something that had never truly left the woods. Over the next few days, things started to spiral. Kate began seeing that same figure at the edge of her vision, lingering in shadows, just outside her window at night. Liam reported the same brief glimpses of movement when he walked outside, things out of place that didn't seem right. And Josh, for all his denial, couldn't sleep without waking up in a cold sweat, his mind haunted by the sound of knocking. Something had followed them back from the cabin. And now it was clear, it wasn't done with them. Kate didn't know what to do. They couldn't go back to the cabin, but the sense of being haunted, of something waiting just beyond the light, was growing stronger every day. Whatever had started out there wasn't finished. And it was beginning to close in on them. The days after the photo kept Kate on edge, unable to shake the feeling that something was wrong. She had almost convinced herself it was all in her head, just an after effect of the fear they had experienced that weekend. But the figure in the photo, and the way it seemed to follow her, told her otherwise. One evening, after yet another restless night, she received a message from Josh. "Liam's missing." Kate's heart skipped a beat. She stared at the message, not quite understanding. Liam had been fine just a few days ago. What did he mean by missing? He couldn't just vanish. She immediately called Josh, her hands shaking. "What do you mean, missing? Did he leave town or something?" Kate asked, her voice urgent. No, Josh said, his voice tight with panic. "He didn't come home last night. He wasn't answering his phone. I checked his place this morning. His car's still there, but he's gone. No sign of anything, just gone. His stuff's all still there." Kate's stomach twisted. Her mind raced with possibilities. What about the photo? What if it's the same thing? That thing followed him too. I don't know what it is, but yeah. Something's off. I've been trying to get a hold of him, but I can't. I'm going to his place now. You should come with me. Without thinking twice, Kate grabbed her coat and rushed out the door. The drive to Liam's apartment was quiet, the tension in the air thick. Every passing minute felt like an eternity. When they arrived, they found Liam's apartment door slightly ajar. Kate's heart pounded as they entered cautiously, calling out his name. There was no answer, just the unsettling quiet of an empty space. The living room was untouched, and his phone was lying on the coffee table, still turned on but with no messages or calls. Josh moved through the apartment, checking each room. When he opened the bedroom door, his breath caught. On the wall, scrawled in dark red, were symbols. The same symbols they had seen on the cabin. The ones that had been carved into the cabin's side. Kate stepped forward, her mind racing. We have to find him. But where? They had no clue where Liam could have gone. It felt as if he had vanished without a trace, leaving behind only the strange markings. That night, Kate couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about the cabin and the symbols. She remembered the clerk's warning sometime. What if it wasn't just the cabin they'd disturbed? What if it was something more, something that had been dormant until they got too close? The knocking, the strange sensation of being watched. The figure in the photo. It all made sense now. The thing that had followed them from the woods hadn't just been a ghost or an entity, it was something older, something that had been waiting, lurking, and it was using them, pulling them into its grasp. The next day, Kate and Josh went to the cabin, the last place they hadn't searched. They hadn't gone back there since that night, but now they felt they had no choice. They needed answers. The road seemed longer this time, the trees more oppressive, the air heavier. As they approached the cabin, they noticed something unsettling. There were no marks of the previous demolition. The area around the cabin, which had been fenced off, was now wide open. The cabin itself stood there, exactly as it had before. Kate's breath caught in her throat. This wasn't possible. They had seen it torn down, the bulldozers had been there, yet now the cabin was standing there, as though nothing had happened. What the hell is going on? Josh whispered, eyes wide with disbelief. They approached cautiously, but as soon as they stepped onto the porch, the knocking began. Faint at first, then louder, more insistent. The sound came from inside the cabin, echoing through the walls. Kate didn't want to go inside, but she felt an irresistible pull, like something was calling to her, urging her forward. Josh hesitated, but after a moment, he followed. Inside, it was just as it had been that night, dim, dusty, and filled with an oppressive atmosphere. But now, the symbols were everywhere. Carved into the walls, etched into the furniture. The air felt thick, as if it was suffocating them, pressing them down. The knocking stopped, and in the silence, they heard something else, a faint whisper, like someone calling their name. Liam, Kate said, barely able to breathe. Liam, is that you? The whispering grew louder, a jumble of voices. They couldn't understand what it was saying, but the words felt like they were reaching inside them, scraping at their minds. Josh grabbed Kate's arm. We have to leave. Now. But as they turned to leave, the door slammed shut behind them with a deafening bang. They were trapped. The knocking started again, louder than before. And then, as if on cue, the air in the cabin grew colder, and a figure appeared in the doorway, tall, shadowy, and indistinct, its shape flickering like a faulty film reel. Kate's heart stopped. It was the figure from the photo, the one that had been lurking in the corner of their picture. And it was real. Before they could react, the figure moved, faster than they could process. The whispers turned to screams, and the world around them seemed to distort, like the cabin was closing in on them. In a panic, Kate and Josh fought to open the door, but it wouldn't budge. The darkness around them thickened, and then, in the blink of an eye, the figure was gone. When they finally managed to escape, gasping for air in the daylight, the cabin behind them seemed to exhale, as if it had been holding its breath all along. Liam was still missing, but now, Kate and Josh knew what they were up against. And no matter how far they ran, they couldn't escape what had followed them into their lives. Kate and Josh stumbled away from the cabin, their legs weak, the pounding in their chests echoing louder than the silence around them. They didn't stop running until they were back at the car, but even then, they didn't feel safe. The cabin's grip on them wasn't just physical, it felt like it had wormed its way into their minds, following them with every passing second. When they finally sat down, gasping for breath, Kate's phone buzzed in her pocket. She almost didn't want to look, afraid it would be more of the eerie, unexplained messages they had been receiving. But when she saw the name, her blood ran cold. It was from Liam. "I'm at the cabin. Come back. Please." Kate's hands shook as she showed Josh the message. "It's him," she whispered. "He's alive. He's asking us to come back." Josh didn't say anything for a moment. His face was pale, his eyes wide with disbelief. "That can't be real, right? He can't be there, Kate. He's gone. We saw the signs. We heard the knocking. We felt it." "I know," Kate said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But it's Liam. It's his phone number." Her thumb hovered over the reply button, but something inside her screamed not to. Instead, she dialed Liam's number. It rang once, twice, 3 times. Then, finally, the call was answered. There was a long, eerie silence on the other end. "Liam?" Kate asked, her voice trembling. "I'm here, Kate," came the answer. But it didn't sound like Liam. The voice was hoarse, almost as if it were strained, twisted in some way. "Where are you? What happened? We were so worried." "I'm at the cabin," the voice interrupted, though it didn't sound like Liam's at all anymore. "It's waiting for you. It doesn't want you to leave." Kate felt a chill run through her body. That voice wasn't Liam's. It couldn't be. It was wrong, altered somehow. "Liam?" she asked again, trying to steady her breath. "Is that really you? Where are you?" The voice on the other end laughed, a low, rasping sound that sent a wave of dread through her. "It's not Liam. It never was. But you'll join him soon. Come back to the cabin. It's where you belong." Kate's stomach dropped. She hung up the phone immediately, throwing it down onto the passenger seat. "Josh, that wasn't Liam. That wasn't him." Josh nodded slowly, his face pale. I knew it. Something's wrong. We need to go to the police. We have to get help. Kate didn't respond. She stared blankly out the window, her mind reeling. She wanted to go to the police, to get help, but the terror inside her told her that no one could help them now. The cabin. The thing inside it didn't work that way. Let's just go home, Kate finally said, her voice distant. Let's just forget about it. Forget about everything. Josh didn't argue. He didn't know what else to say either. They drove in silence for a long time, the forest fading behind them, until they were out of the woods and back on the main highway. But even then, it didn't feel like they had truly escaped. The pressure in the air, the weight on their chests, was still there. That night, Kate barely slept. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the dark figure from the cabin, its shadow lingering in the corners of her vision, its whispers haunting her ears. It was always just out of reach, but it was there. At around 3 a.m., Kate jolted awake, drenched in sweat. She reached for her phone, almost instinctively, as if something were pulling her to check it. She opened her messages, her heart pounding in her chest. There was another message from Liam's number. I told you it's waiting. Don't ignore me. Her hands shook as she read it. How was this happening? How was his phone still working? How could it be possible for him to send messages when he was gone? When they had seen the strange figure in the cabin, Kate sent a quick reply, trying to stay calm. Where are you? What's going on? The response came almost instantly. I'm in the woods. It's dark, but I can feel it. I can't leave. Kate looked at Josh, who had been sleeping next to her, unaware of the message. She didn't wake him up immediately. Instead, she stared at the words on the screen, dread curling in her stomach. It was as if the message was pulling her back, forcing her to go back to the cabin, to the thing that had taken Liam, to whatever was still holding on to them both. She knew what she had to do. I have to go back, she whispered to herself, though she wasn't sure if she was convincing herself or if the words were meant for something else, something that had been waiting for her to return. But Josh was starting to stir. Kate, what's going on? Her breath caught in her throat. She had to make a choice. Would she return to the cabin to face whatever had taken Liam, or would she try to run away from it all, leaving the memories of the cabin and the shadow that haunted them behind? There was no answer. She knew there was only one choice. Kate sat still for a moment, staring at the phone screen, her thoughts swirling in a panic. She couldn't bring herself to wake Josh just yet. He had been through enough, and she didn't want him to know that she was considering going back to the cabin. But deep down, she felt the pull something wasn't finished. The feeling of dread, of being followed, wouldn't leave her alone. Finally, she shook her head, trying to push the thoughts away. She couldn't go back. It wasn't rational. No one in their right mind would return to that place. She glanced at Josh, who was still half asleep, his face crumpled in confusion. She closed her phone quickly and turned off the screen. She wouldn't let herself get caught up in it again. She had to let it go. I'm going to call the police tomorrow, Kate said softly, trying to keep her voice steady. We'll report Liam missing and tell them everything. They'll know what to do. Josh nodded, but he didn't seem convinced. He was silent for a long moment, then sighed. I don't know, Kate. This doesn't feel like something the police can handle. There's something off about all of this. I know, she whispered, feeling the weight of his words. But what other option did they have? The fear was consuming her. The more she thought about it, the more she realized that the best thing they could do was to stop looking for answers. Stop poking at something that wasn't meant to be understood. They had seen enough to know that this thing, whatever it was, didn't play by normal rules. The night passed slowly. Kate barely slept. Every time she shut her eyes, her mind was flooded with images of the cabin, of the figure in the corner of the photograph, of the voice on the other end of the phone. But when morning finally came, the reality of their situation hit her in a way she couldn't ignore anymore. Kate made the decision. She would go to the police. She would talk to them about everything, about the strange messages, the figure, the phone calls. But she knew, deep down, that it wasn't going to make the things that had been following them disappear. They had seen things no one should ever see, and now they were in it. The truth would come out, but it wouldn't be the kind of truth that made sense. It would be something darker, something beyond the explanation of law enforcement. As she and Josh left the house that morning, Kate couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. It was a strange, unshakable sensation that stuck to her like a second skin. Every movement, every step felt as though someone or something was following them. She looked over her shoulder more times than she could count, but saw nothing. They didn't speak much as they drove to the police station. They didn't have to. They both knew the reality. They weren't dealing with anything normal. The officer they spoke to took their story seriously, but Kate could tell he was skeptical. Of course they would be. How could anyone believe such an outlandish tale? And even though they explained everything, the photo, the messages, the figure in the cabin, Kate couldn't shake the thought that the police couldn't help them. They couldn't fight something that didn't follow rules. When they left the station, the air outside felt different, colder. It seemed to press in on them from all sides. Kate glanced at Josh as they climbed back into the car, but neither of them said anything. They knew they had done what they could. But as they drove, the phone buzzed again. It was from Liam's number. You can't escape me. You'll never leave. Kate froze, her hand trembling as she stared at the message. She didn't even want to reply. But the cold dread in her stomach told her it wasn't over. And then, from somewhere behind them, they both heard it. A faint knocking sound, barely audible over the hum of the engine. It was soft at first, like tapping against the back window. But as they looked in the rearview mirror, Kate's heart stopped. There was no one there. The knocking stopped. Kate and Josh didn't speak. They drove faster, glancing at each other as if the reality of the last few weeks had finally settled in. They couldn't escape it. Whatever had been following them, whatever had taken Liam, it was still there. And it would never let them go.